Alright guys, welcome back to the video. So today I'm hoping to get our axe finished up here. We've got the handle blank, all glued up. It's cured for a few days now. It's good to go. The axe head is looking great with that matte black paint on it that's had a few days to harden up too. So it should be in very good condition to actually start getting some use to it. So all we have left to do on the head here is just to go through and add a final sharpening to the edge. So we're going to knock off the paint with a file, then actually finally sharpen it. That's going to be the very last thing we do though, because the last thing I want to deal with at the moment is a sharp axe floating around and having to manhandle it. So we're going to do that very last. What we're going to start by working on is getting our handle shaped out here. Now, the most common way I can find online to shape an axe handle is with a 2x72 grinder. You know, those big knife making grinders, most people just kind of go for it and are able to create some pretty cool stuff. I have my little rigid oscillating belt sander thing that might work for some of it, but for the most part, I think I'm going to be trying to use some hand tools for it. The only real trick that's going to be involved in making this axe handle is this top section here. So the area where it goes into the actual axe head. Because the area up in the top here has to taper in basically two directions. It's widest right in the middle point here, then it goes to a wider taper at the bottom here. Then we have a slightly narrower taper at the front, you know, kind of in the same shape as the axe head itself. But it also tapers through the head, which is one of the things that helps hold everything together. Because that way when you pound the wedge in the top there, the top area splays out and kind of creates a, just creates a stronger hold in there. So we have to taper in a few different directions, so it's going to be a lot of trial and error and just trying to fit this thing up as best I can. Again, my goal here is not to make a, perfect axe that I would be willing to sell. The goal is to just try making an axe handle that fits into an axe head, and that is all I really want to achieve from it. So I can basically have something like this axe here that I made myself. Is actually going pretty well. It started out going really bad. You can kind of pick out there, not super easily on the camera, but I've got pretty big gaps at the top here. And that was before I kind of started to figure out how to actually fit the head on here. I was just trying to get the head to be seated on. Now we still have a decent ways to go. You can see this little notch right here. That is where we're trying to get the head all the way down to, just past that point or on that point. And so we still have probably an inch or two to go. So basically all I'm doing right now is I'm putting the head onto the axe here, and I can just put the axe on the floor, hammer on the head a little bit to seat it down nice and tight. Then when I pop the head off, you can see that there's all these black marks right around here and on this side here, and then a little bit on this front edge here. So then I just go back in with the spokeshave, remove material going in the direction of those marks, and then that is what's getting me closer and closer and closer and closer. So we're going about 1/8 of an inch at a time every time I put the head on. So given that we still have probably 1 inch to go, I'm gonna be here a little while working on this. So I got the head down as far as I want it to go when it's fully seated on there. The top side is not going to look great, but again, I'm just making this axe for myself. It's not like I'm making it for anyone. But yeah, we're going to have some pretty good gaps in here. Even when we actually pound in the wedge, it's not actually going to really split the wood enough to fill in those gaps. So it's going to be fine. You know, the axe head will still hold on there just fine. I've seen way worse than this that have still held fine. So I'm not too concerned about it. But yeah, it holds on there really solidly. Again, this is just with hammering it on the top there. So now we just have to go through and clean up the rest of the handle here, get it all nicely shaped so that it's feeling nice and smooth like the top side here. Because this area is really nicely shaped. We're even starting to get some nice shape around this top area here, you know, where you kind of put your hand to grip it. So it's looking really cool. And again, as we carve through it and some of that hickory starts to poke out through the walnut there, that is such an awesome look. And I'm really excited to see how it looks going through the rest of the handle here. So like I mentioned in the last video, the spray paint that I put on the blade here, I don't expect it to last or to really do anything. In fact, I expect it to go away pretty quickly here. And you can kind of see, just as I've been hammering on it, it's starting to chip away on all of these edges here. So as I work with it, as I'm moving it around, as I'm doing stuff with it, that paint is starting to chip away. And what will happen is the paint will very slowly wear off, especially as you start to abrade these two faces by hitting it through a piece of wood. I know for a fact that paint is going to start to wear off. But what's also going to happen is it's going to get ground into the steel more and more and more. So we're going to be left with this worn and torn looking blade on this beautifully clean and pristine handle. It's going to actually look pretty interesting in my opinion. So going back to how we cleaned up the head here, if I was able to go back in and sandblast it and get all the paint out of, you know, all these little grooves and that, from there I could have gone in and done a cold bluing of the head, which actually would have darkened the steel, you know, got it to a near black, not quite as black as it is right now with this matte paint on it. But that would have been another option that probably would have been a little bit of a cleaner touch. Okay, so we now have the handle all nicely sanded up. I started by going up to 220 grit, then I realized that was just way too slick. Like when you swung the handle, you'd feel your hand slipping on it, which is something you really don't want to have happen when you're talking about an axe. So I went back and resanded it down to 150 grit. Now it's got a little bit more texture to it, which is good. You know, it's a little more grippy. So then I also cut the slot for our wedge, and then I cut our wedge. So the important thing here is that your wedge follows the same grain pattern as the handle. So your grain should be flowing through that wedge for a nice strong piece of wood. So all we have to do once we put the head on is pound this wedge in until it's nice and tight. Now, the trick is that if I pound this wedge in too far, it has the chance of splitting the handle. If I don't pound it in far enough, it's not going to hold the head on. Now, like you can see on these axes, they have a little extra thing that gets pounded in there. Now, these things aren't ideal to put in an axe head like this because they make replacing it a lot harder. If you just have the wooden wedge in there, all you have to do to replace it is cut the old handle off, and then you can usually just chisel out or pound out what's left of the wood in there. But if you have this little metal bit in there, it makes it way harder to change out that handle because now you can't use chisels, you can't use anything sharp in there because it's going to get destroyed by hitting that metal piece. So it's really unfortunate that Hults Bruk does that on a lot of their axes. I think both the hatchet and this one have that little round thing on there. It would be better if they only had the wooden wedge in there, but adding in the wooden wedge also means that your head has to be perfectly fitted up, which I also know that I don't have here. So because this axe is just for me, I'm not going to let anyone else use it. I'm going to be able to very closely monitor and see just how well I did with the fit up here. If I notice that as I use this axe that the head is starting to come off, then I know that my handle fit up was not tight enough or not good enough to actually hold the head on there with all the, the aggressive force that comes with using an axe. So I'm definitely procrastinating because I am terrified to have to do this because this is where literally everything can go wrong. So yeah, now we just need to, I'm gonna leave it for a few hours, let that glue cure up so it gets nice and hard. Then we'll come back in, cut it off, sharpen up the blade, and actually take it for a quick test run. Okay, so we got the first coat of oil on here, and this thing looks amazing. It feels awesome in the hands. Everything about it is just super, super nice. So off camera, obviously I'm going to put on a couple more coats of oil just to make sure that it's well protected. But everything is looking really dang good here. So I'm excited to go give this thing a test cut, see how well it actually does. I'm going to try and get as much of the oil off here as I can, because I would love it if I'm not getting oil on absolutely everything. But yeah, this thing is, it looks so good, so very good. I'm half expecting it to just shatter on the first, on the first cut. But I mean, overall, it's a pretty looking thing at this point in time. So I cannot complain too much. I'm kind of terrified at how sharp I was able to get that edge there. So I cleaned it up with the file, and then I went at it with one of my older Waterstones. So I started with 1,000 grit, went up to, I believe the other side is 4,000 grit, and we've actually got a pretty sharp edge here. Now I did do the paper test, and it's not that it slices through a piece of paper nicely or anything like that. It's still not like a razor sharp blade, but it's an axe. It's not meant to have a razor sharp blade on it. It just needs to have a good sharp edge so you can actually seat it into the wood. Okay, so with a few test cuts under our belt now, this thing is still looking pretty good. As expected, you can see that the paint did not hold up whatsoever. So the one question that this did kind of answer is on a lot of these other heads that are painted, you can see that the paint actually starts pretty far back, like over 2.5 inches into the blade there. So on this one, where we lost that paint would be within the same distance as this on this blade where there is just no paint. So obviously the reason on those painted heads why they keep the paint line farther back is just purely because they don't want this kind of thing to happen. They know that they know that this is the area that's probably going to get hit the most and hit the hardest, so there's no point painting all the way up to that edge. So in the future, if I decide to do more of these axes, I'm definitely going to look for heads that are more like my other two axes that have the rough forging on them. They're not all polished up like this, and they're definitely not painted. Or I'd go through and try to sandblast them and then do like a cold blue kind of thing on it, so that they stay a color more permanently, because the paint is very much so just a surface finish, and it's not surprising that it comes off pretty easily. But overall, again, I'm super happy with how this thing came out. That handle all the way down there just looks amazing with that walnut and the hickory going through it. And yeah, it's going to be a nice little piece to have around. I didn't notice any looseness in the head when I was using it, and reefing on it right now, there's still nothing moving around. So it's actually in there really well. The wedge that we put in is holding nice and strong. So that means I have managed to restore this axe head back to a usable condition, which is awesome. The one thing I am still kind of interested in is whether or not this axe has actually been hardened, because the steel on the front here does seem very soft. I hit a knot or something in one of the pieces of wood, and we do have another little chip right on the edge here. I do almost think that this edge has not been properly hardened when it was actually made and sold. That, or when it was being used by, a youth group and people that don't really know how to use axes, it was probably used to poke around at a fire, which may have affected the hardness of this edge here. So that's something I'm definitely going to look into, is seeing how to test the hardness of an edge like this, whether or not axes even need to be, how hard axe heads needs to be and all that kind of thing. Because I know typically on an axe axe head, you just are going to harden the blade. So you're going to heat up just the edge of the blade and then quench it in oil so that it actually just hardens that front section. You don't need to harden the whole thing. But then at that point, you also need to go through and temper it, you know, put it in the oven for a little while, all that kind of stuff, which I can't do with this axe head anymore because obviously the spray paint would just turn into toxic gases at that point. So I'm just going to leave it the way it is. I'm just going to keep using it, see how it performs. And then I know for the next axe that I do, probably try some other things, you know, check the head for the hardness, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this project. I hope you enjoyed it. It was a really fun one, especially just hand carving this whole handle here. That was a ton of fun to do. Definitely something I'm going to do more of in the future. So it's not quite as exciting as the hand plane I refinished, but it was a fun and exciting thing to do. You know, it looks really cool all the way through, and now I have just another axe to add to my collection. I am going to have to make a leather sheath for this at some point, though, because it is kind of dangerous just having an axe floating around without anything covering the blade there. But anyways, guys, I do hope you enjoyed this project, and I will see you in the next one.